It was just another day at the office for Alicia, the elegant and composed CEO of a rapidly growing tech firm. Her life seemed perfect: successful career, a lavish home, and a seemingly ideal marriage to her husband, James. But appearances, as they often do, were deceiving. Alicia sat in her sleek, glass-walled office overlooking the city, fingers lightly tapping on her keyboard. She glanced at the clock. It was almost 5. She had to finish a few more things before she could join her husband at their anniversary dinner. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from James. "Can't wait to see you tonight. I've been planning something special. See you soon, my love." A small smile crept onto her face. Their marriage had its ups and downs, but she couldn't deny that there was love between them, even if it had started to feel like a distant memory at times. She turned her attention back to the task at hand, her mind racing through the endless paperwork. But before she could get into the rhythm, the door to her office opened without a knock. Standing there was Leo, the firm's head of security. His tall, muscular frame blocked most of the light from the hallway as he stood there, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Alicia," he said in a low, almost gruff voice, "there's a situation with the security system. We need to check something quickly in the basement." Alicia was taken aback. Leo was never one to just barge in with such urgency, and his tone felt different. Still, her instincts told her not to argue. "All right, Leo. I'll come down with you. Just give me a moment to grab my coat." She quickly gathered her things and followed him out of the office, her heels clicking against the polished floor. As they walked through the dimly lit hallways of the building, she couldn't help but notice how Leo's usual stern expression was now tinged with something else, something more intense. But she brushed it off. Maybe he was just stressed. Security work was never easy. They reached the elevator, and Leo pressed the button for the basement level. The soft hum of the elevator was the only sound between them, the tension palpable. Alicia glanced at him, her curiosity piqued. "Everything okay, Leo?" she asked, trying to break the silence. He turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting hers. His gaze lingered a little too long, making Alicia feel a flutter in her chest. But she quickly dismissed it. Leo had always been professional, and that was all there was to it. The elevator doors slid open, and they stepped out into the quiet, concrete hallway of the building's basement. Alicia's eyes scanned the area, but there was nothing unusual in sight. "What exactly needs fixing down here?" she asked, her voice echoing in the empty space. Without saying a word, Leo turned to face her fully. Alicia felt a strange unease settle in her stomach. Something was off. Before she could react, Leo closed the gap between them in 2 swift steps, grabbing her by the shoulders with a surprising intensity. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. "Leo, what are you?" His lips crashed onto hers before she could finish her sentence. The kiss was rough, almost desperate. Alicia's heart raced, her mind struggling to make sense of what was happening. She pushed him back, but his grip tightened, and his eyes, usually so guarded, now held an emotion she couldn't place, something dark, something dangerous. And then, the unexpected happened. The sound of the elevator doors opening behind them startled both of them. Alicia's breath caught in her throat as she turned to see her husband, James, standing in the doorway, his face pale, his expression a mix of shock and betrayal. "James," Alicia whispered, her voice trembling. James stood there, frozen, staring at them. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched at his sides. What the hell is going on here? Alicia's world seemed to shatter in that moment. How could this be happening? Why would Leo do this now, of all times? And what was she supposed to say to James? Her husband, the man she loved, the man who had trusted her, who had believed in their marriage. But all she could do was stare at him, guilt and confusion swirling inside her. James didn't move for a long time. And then, without a word, he turned on his heel and walked away, disappearing down the hallway. Alicia stood there, frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. What had just happened? Why had Leo kissed her? What had he been trying to prove? And most importantly, what would happen next? Alicia stood motionless in the basement, her hands trembling at her sides. The sound of her heart beating in her ears drowned out everything else. She couldn't move, couldn't speak, as the weight of what had just happened settled on her like a suffocating blanket. Leo stood before her, still unervingly calm, as though the kiss hadn't just shattered everything between them. The tension between them was thick, and Alicia could hardly look at him. Her thoughts were spinning, chaotic. What was he thinking? What was she supposed to say? I don't understand, Leo, she finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. Why would you do that? Why now? Leo didn't meet her eyes. Instead, he glanced at the elevator doors, which were now closed, hiding James from view. I'm sorry, Ms. Alicia. I shouldn't have. His voice trailed off, but there was no regret in his tone, only the same coldness that had always been there. Alicia's confusion deepened. She had known Leo for years. He had always been the reliable one, protective, loyal, almost like a brother. She had never seen him like this. Never imagined that he could do something so reckless. Leo, look at me, she demanded, stepping closer. What is going on? Why did you do this? For the first time, Leo's eyes flickered with something resembling vulnerability. He didn't answer immediately, and the silence stretched between them, suffocating them both. Alicia could see that something was wrong, something deeper than just a moment of misplaced desire. But what? Before she could press him further, she heard footsteps approaching from the hallway. Alicia's heart skipped a beat. Was it James? Was he coming back? Would he say something? Would he leave her? But no, it wasn't James. A tall, wiry figure stepped into the basement, his face shadowed by the dim lighting. Alicia instantly recognized him. It was David, Leo's older brother, who worked in the building's legal department. David had always been quiet, kept to himself mostly, but there was something about him that made Alicia uneasy. She had never felt fully comfortable around him, though she never understood why. David's gaze flicked from Alicia to Leo, his lips curling into a faint, knowing smile. I see the situation's been handled, he said, his voice smooth and dripping with something Alicia couldn't quite place. Alicia's pulse quickened. She tried to ignore the creeping suspicion that was growing in her mind. What did David know? Why was he here? Handled? Leo muttered, his voice tight as if he were forcing the words out. I messed up. David chuckled darkly. You're telling me. He took a step forward, casting a glance toward Alicia. But you'll figure this out, won't you? After all, you've always been good at cleaning up messes, haven't you, Alicia? Alicia's stomach dropped. There it was, the underlying tension, the sense that something had been brewing under the surface for much longer than she had realized. But before she could ask anything, Leo stepped in front of her, blocking her view of David. Stay out of this, David, Leo growled, his voice unusually strained. David raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Instead, he looked at Alicia and smirked. Suit yourself. Then he turned to leave, disappearing as quickly as he had come. Alicia stood there, bewildered, her mind racing. What did David mean by that? What was really going on here? She looked at Leo, but he had already turned his back to her, facing the far wall. He was avoiding her gaze, lost in his own thoughts. Alicia wanted answers. She needed them, but she knew that now wasn't the time to demand them. I'm not going to let this go, Leo, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. I need to know what's happening. Leo's shoulders tensed. For a moment, it seemed like he might finally speak, but he only nodded, as if he were agreeing to something much bigger than just this moment. Alicia took a deep breath. She couldn't shake the feeling that everything was falling apart, and she had no idea where to begin putting the pieces back together. Her marriage was in jeopardy, her trust in Leo shattered, and the strange, cryptic conversation with David only left her with more questions than answers. Before she could process her emotions further, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from James. I don't know what I saw, Alicia, but I can't just pretend it didn't happen. I need space. Alicia's heart clenched in her chest. She typed a quick reply, but her hands were shaking too much to form coherent words. Instead, she stood there, staring at the screen, wondering if there was any way she could fix the damage. But the truth was, she had no idea where to start. Alicia spent the next few hours in a daze. The events from the basement replayed in her mind over and over like a broken record. She couldn't focus on work, and she couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that gnawed at her from the inside. What was happening? Why was everything falling apart so quickly? It was Mia, her personal assistant, who walked in with a hesitant smile. "Ms. Alicia, is everything okay?" she asked softly, her eyes darting between Alicia and the tense atmosphere of the office. Alicia's first instinct was to say, yes, but she couldn't lie. Not to Mia. Mia had been with her for years. She was more than an assistant. She was a friend. And right now, Alicia needed someone who would listen, even if just for a moment. "I don't know, Mia. I honestly don't know." Alicia's voice cracked. She wiped her eyes quickly, trying to regain composure. "I don't understand any of this. What does David have to do with this? Why did he seem so smug?" Mia leaned back, considering the situation. David's always been different. He's got a way of making people uncomfortable, don't you think? Maybe it's just me, but I've noticed things around here. And I have a feeling he's involved in something that goes deeper than you realize. Alicia shook her head. "I don't want to believe that. David's always been professional. He's always kept to himself." Mia gave her a knowing look. "Sometimes, the quiet ones are the ones you have to watch the closest." Alicia didn't respond. Instead, she grabbed her phone and stared at the message from James again. Her fingers hovered over the screen, her mind racing. What could she say? How could she fix this? She couldn't just let their marriage fall apart. Not like this. "I need to talk to him," Alicia whispered, mostly to herself. "Then go," Mia urged, her voice soft but insistent. "You can't fix things by avoiding them. If there's something you need to say, say it." But as Alicia stood up and walked toward the door, her mind kept drifting back to Leo. What had driven him to kiss her? And what did it mean for their relationship, their entire dynamic? She stepped into the hallway, her heart racing. The office building felt cold now, the sterile walls closing in around her as she made her way to the elevator. Her fingers shook as she pressed the button to the ground floor, the soft chime of the elevator doors making her stomach flip. When the doors opened, Alicia stepped out into the lobby, expecting to see the usual crowd of employees working, rushing to their next task. But the lobby was eerily empty. Then, as she walked toward the exit, she noticed something strange. There, in the corner, was Leo, standing alone, his back to her, his broad shoulders tense. His usual confident demeanor was nowhere to be seen. There was something off about him, something Alicia couldn't put her finger on. She hesitated for a moment, torn between confronting him and continuing toward the door. But before she could make a decision, Leo turned, his eyes meeting hers. For a second, they both just stood there, the air thick with unspoken words. Alicia's pulse quickened, but she didn't back down. "Leo," she started, her voice low. "What's going on? Why did you do that? Why now?" Leo's face was unreadable, his expression almost mechanical. "I don't know, Alicia," he muttered, his voice rough. "But I had to. I couldn't help it." Alicia took a step closer, her breath shaky. "Leo, what's really happening? What are you not telling me?" He opened his mouth to speak, but just then, the doors to the elevator opened again, and David stepped out, his eyes locking on Alicia's. There was a quiet, unsettling confidence in his walk as he approached them, his smile almost predatory. "I think we all need to have a conversation," David said, his tone smooth, almost too smooth. "Don't you?" Alicia's stomach twisted. What was David doing here? Why did it feel like everything was leading to a moment she wasn't ready for? And as Leo and David exchanged a glance, Alicia felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Alicia's heart pounded in her chest as David's words hung in the air, thick with menace. The way he spoke, the calmness in his voice, it made her skin crawl. She had never felt so exposed in her own workplace, so completely out of control. David's smirk didn't waver as he looked from Leo to Alicia, his gaze calculating. "I'm sure you're both wondering why I'm here," he said, his tone laced with something Alicia couldn't quite grasp, but it felt like a threat. "But I think we all have something to say, don't we?" Leo shifted uncomfortably, but didn't speak. He just stood there, his back tense, his eyes darting between Alicia and David as though he were trapped in the middle of something bigger than himself. Alicia's mind raced. Why was David acting like this? What did he want from her? "David, what are you talking about?" Alicia asked, trying to keep her voice steady, though her insides were anything but calm. "What's going on here?" David's smile only widened, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling mix of amusement and something darker. "Oh, it's quite simple, really. It's time for the truth to come out." Alicia took a step back, suddenly feeling a strange sense of dread. The truth? What truth? Her stomach churned as she realized how little she truly knew about the men standing in front of her. "I don't have time for games," she snapped, her frustration and confusion boiling over. "What do you want from me, David?" David's gaze flickered to Leo for just a moment before he stepped closer to Alicia, his voice lowering as if sharing some secret. "You see, Alicia, there's been something I've been meaning to tell you for a long time," he said, his words slow and deliberate. "Something that's been building between us. Between me, Leo, and you." Alicia's breath hitched. Between them? What did he mean? Her eyes darted to Leo, but he didn't seem to be offering any answers. In fact, Leo looked almost afraid. His usual composure was gone, replaced by a nervous energy that Alicia had never seen from him before. "I think it's time you understand what's been going on behind the scenes," David continued, his voice now smooth as velvet. "All those little things you've been brushing off, the strange behavior, the missed meetings, the sudden absences. It's all part of a much bigger picture. A picture you've been too blind to see." Alicia felt her stomach drop. What was he talking about? She tried to piece together the events that had happened over the last few days, but they all seemed so disconnected. The kiss from Leo, David's strange arrival, the odd tension between them. Was all of it connected somehow? David took another step toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. "You think this is just about Leo kissing you?" "Oh no, Alicia. It's far more than that. You're just a pawn in a much bigger game. One that's been in motion for much longer than you realize." Alicia's mind raced, the words not making any sense. Pawn? Bigger game? What was he implying? Her body went cold, as if the room itself had chilled. "I don't know what you're talking about," Alicia said, her voice trembling now. "You're not making any sense." David's smile faded, replaced with a hard edge. "You will. Soon enough." The tension in the air was suffocating. Alicia could feel the weight of his words, could sense the shift in the atmosphere. Something was coming. Something she wasn't prepared for. But before she could ask him to explain, Leo finally spoke, his voice low and strained. "David, stop." Leo's eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. "This isn't the time. She doesn't need to know this right now." Alicia turned to him, her gaze piercing. "Leo, what is he talking about? What is going on?" But Leo only shook his head, his face tight with emotion. I can't explain it. Not now. But David's right. The truth is bigger than you think. And you're involved whether you want to be or not." Alicia felt the world tilt on its axis. What was happening? She had trusted Leo. She had trusted them both. And now everything was crumbling around her. Her marriage, her career, her sense of security, everything felt like it was slipping through her fingers. "Don't listen to him," Leo said quickly, as if trying to salvage what little remained of the fragile connection between them. "Alicia, I didn't want you to be part of this. It wasn't supposed to be like this." David laughed, the sound hollow and cold. You think she's not part of it, Leo? She's already knee-deep in it, whether she realizes it or not. The moment she married James, the moment she stepped into this building, she was already involved. Alicia's heart skipped a beat. James, she whispered, the name feeling foreign in her mouth. What did James have to do with this? David's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he watched her struggle to comprehend. There it is. Now the pieces are starting to fit together, aren't they? But before she could ask more questions, the sound of a car engine roaring outside caught their attention. The building's glass doors opened, and a figure stepped inside, a tall man in a suit, looking out of place in the midst of all this tension. It was James. Alicia's breath caught in her throat. Was he here to save her? Or was he somehow part of whatever mess she had unknowingly stepped into? James stood at the entrance, his eyes scanning the room, locking onto Alicia with a look that was equal parts urgent and distant. It felt as if time itself had stopped, the air between them charged with 1,000 unsaid words. For a brief moment, Alicia almost didn't recognize him. He wasn't the man she had married, the man she thought she knew. This was someone else, someone hardened, detached. James, Alicia breathed, her voice cracking slightly as she took a step toward him. Her heart hammered in her chest. Was he here to explain everything? Was this the moment she'd finally get the truth? But James didn't answer right away. He simply looked at her, his expression unreadable, before his gaze shifted to Leo and David. Alicia's eyes flicked between the three men, and for the first time in her life, she felt completely alone in a room full of people she should trust. "What's going on?" she whispered, almost pleading now. "Why are you all acting like this? Why is everything turning into a nightmare?" James didn't immediately respond, his face set in a mask of control. The tension in the room was thick, like a storm waiting to break. He took a slow step forward, and his gaze finally returned to Alicia. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice tight, like the words themselves were choking him. "I should have told you earlier, but there was no way to explain it. Not without putting you in danger." Alicia froze. Danger? What was he talking about? Her heart sank as she tried to process his words. What danger? From who? David let out a small chuckle, shaking his head in disbelief. "You really think she's ready for the truth, James? After everything she's been through today?" Leo's jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. It was like the entire room had turned against Alicia. She was desperate for answers, but each word that came out of their mouths only added more questions to the pile. "Alicia, I didn't want to drag you into this," James continued, his voice softer now, like he was afraid of what her reaction might be. "But everything we've been through, it's all connected. You, me, Leo, David. It's all part of a much bigger web." Alicia felt her pulse race. "What do you mean, James? What are you saying?" Leo stepped forward, his voice low, almost as though he was afraid of saying too much. "Alicia, you don't understand. The game you're part of, it's not something you can just walk away from. This has been in motion long before you came into the picture." David crossed his arms, his eyes cold. "The truth, Alicia, is that you've been a part of something much larger than you realize. And everything that's happening now, it's not just a coincidence." Alicia's mind was spinning. She felt like she was drowning in their words. The events of the past few days, the kiss, Leo's strange behavior, David's cryptic comments, none of it made sense, and now James was saying she was involved in something bigger? Alicia took a shaky step back. "No, this is crazy. I don't know what's going on, but I don't want any part of it." James's eyes softened, and he took a step toward her. "You already are part of it, Alicia. You've always been. You just didn't know it." Alicia shook her head, her voice rising with desperation. "No, I can't. This is not what I signed up for." But James grabbed her arm gently, pulling her toward him. "I didn't want you to know. I wanted to protect you. But now, it's too late." Alicia's chest tightened. "Too late for what? What is all of this?" Leo's face twisted in regret, But it was David who spoke again, his voice low and filled with a chilling certainty. "You need to listen, Alicia. Because what happens next, it'll change everything." And with that, he turned, signaling for James to follow him out of the lobby. The tension in the room was suffocating. Alicia stood there, frozen, not knowing whether to follow them or to just walk away. But she couldn't move. Her feet felt rooted to the ground. Leo lingered for a moment, his eyes searching hers, but he said nothing. He just left, disappearing into the same cold silence that enveloped them all. Alicia felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. Was it too late? Had she already crossed a line she couldn't come back from? She had no answers, no way of knowing who to trust anymore. All she knew was that the world she once thought she understood was slipping through her fingers, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She glanced around the empty lobby, her mind reeling. This wasn't just about Leo. It wasn't just about David. It wasn't even about James anymore. This was something else entirely, a dangerous game that she was too late to escape. Alicia stood there, her thoughts tangled in confusion and fear. She felt as though the world around her had shattered, and every piece was slowly falling into place, pieces that didn't belong to her, pieces that she couldn't understand. The men who had once been her foundation, her support, were now strangers, and she had no idea who she could trust. Her heart raced, but she couldn't bring herself to leave. Something inside her told her she needed to know more. She needed answers. The silence in the lobby felt like a heavy weight pressing on her chest, suffocating her. After what felt like an eternity, she took a deep breath and walked out of the lobby, following the direction they had gone. She didn't know why, but something compelled her to follow them, to face whatever truth they were trying to hide. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, and with each step, her mind raced with all the possibilities of what might happen next. She found them outside, near the sleek black car that had pulled up earlier. David and James stood near the vehicle, their heads bent together in quiet conversation. When they saw her approaching, their expressions shifted. James's face was still cold, but there was something else in his eyes, guilt, maybe, or regret. "Alicia," David greeted her, his voice low and almost too casual. "I thought you might want to know more." "Well, here we are." Alicia didn't waste any time. "Tell me everything," she demanded, her voice shaking but strong. "I can't keep living in the dark. What is this about? What have you dragged me into?" James exchanged a brief look with David, then sighed deeply, as though he were about to face some great burden. "It wasn't supposed to be like this, Alicia. It was never meant to come to this point. But now you're involved, and we can't hide the truth from you anymore." David stepped closer, his eyes sharp. "You see, Alicia, there's more going on than you could possibly imagine. You're not just some innocent bystander in all of this. You're the key to everything." Alicia's heart stuttered in her chest. "The key? To what?" James reached for her hand, his touch gentle, almost pleading. "There's an underground operation, Alicia. An entire network that has been in place for years. It's not just about money or power, it's about control. And now you're a part of it." Alicia felt her breath catch in her throat. "Control? What do you mean? How am I involved?" David's grin was cold, his eyes glinting with dark amusement. "You've been the target all along, Alicia. Your marriage to James wasn't by chance. It was planned. You were never meant to stay on the sidelines." James shook his head, his voice filled with regret. "I didn't want it to go this far, but when I met you, it was too late. You became a pawn in a game I should have never let you into." Alicia recoiled, pulling her hand away from his. "A pawn? I don't understand. All I wanted was a normal life, a future with you, James. How could you do this to me?" James lowered his gaze, guilt written all over his face. "I never wanted this for you. But the people I'm involved with, they don't care about normal lives. They don't care about anyone but themselves. And now you're stuck in this mess." David took a step forward, his voice now laced with authority. "You're not stuck, Alicia. You're in control of what happens next. You just don't know it yet, but you will. Soon enough. Alicia's pulse quickened. Control? She didn't feel in control at all. She felt like she was drowning in a sea of lies with no lifeline in sight. She looked between James and David, trying to make sense of their words, but nothing seemed to fit. "What do you want from me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. David smiled, the expression cruel and knowing. "We want you to choose, to decide what side you're on." Alicia's heart skipped a beat. "Choose? What do you mean, choose?" James stepped in, his tone desperate now. "Alicia, listen to me. You don't have to get involved in this. You can walk away. You can leave. But if you do, there's no going back. They'll come after you. They'll destroy everything you love." Alicia's mind spun with the weight of his words. Walk away? But from what? From her life? From everything she thought she knew? There was no way she could just leave. There were too many questions, too many dangers lurking around every corner. David interrupted her thoughts, his voice cold and final. "It's simple, really. We can offer you protection, Alicia. If you stay with us, if you help us, we'll keep you safe. But if you don't, you'll be exposed. Your life, your marriage, everything you care about will fall apart. You're not the same person anymore. None of us are." Alicia felt as though the ground beneath her was crumbling. She wasn't just a victim of their lies. She was a part of the game, whether she liked it or not. She couldn't walk away, not without losing everything. But could she trust them? Could she really believe their promises? Tears filled her eyes, and she swallowed hard, trying to steady her emotions. "So, this is it? This is what you've dragged me into? A game of manipulation and control?" James looked pained. "I never wanted this for you, Alicia. I'm sorry. But now you have to decide. Will you be part of it, or will you lose everything?" Alicia stood there, paralyzed by the weight of the decision before her. Everything she had known, the life she had built, the love she had fought for was crumbling before her eyes. She didn't know if she could trust them. She didn't know if she could live with the consequences of whatever choice she made. But one thing was certain, her life, her future, was never going to be the same again.